The last couple of days we've been in south central Oklahoma going to the variety trials and looking to see how we fared now on the second freeze in April, which have been around the 16th and 17th date. And looking, it seems to me like that we looked like we have escaped a lot of the damage in what we've seen at the variety trials. When you do look in some of the heads though, we do notice that there is a little bit of white discoloration on the tips and that the tops of the heads do have some discoloration. So I think we are going to no doubt see some minor damages in instances here in the central part of the state. A lot of it depends on planting date, a lot of it depends on the variety that was used. I noted that we looked at a field just north of Weatherford yesterday, and it did have a lot more freeze damage in it than what we were seeing in the variety trials, and I think that goes to the date. I think what we have concern now today here on April 23rd is that we're another week further into the growing cycle, and they're talking temperatures, maybe mid-20s, 27 degrees here, south central, and for much Oklahoma tonight. And I think if that happens, no doubt we're going to see potential impact on the crop. Overall, I think if you go out into the western part of the state and there's a corridor from maybe Kingfisher County on up in the north central part of the state where actually there's some wheat that looks really, really good. And I'm hoping that we're not as far along in the growth cycle there to where we will escape that and there won't be, damage in those areas. Northwest part of the state, tends to be a large production area for Oklahoma. We've been plagued by the drought this year, no doubt up there, and just have had really erratic stands, and a lot of that depended on planting date as well as to when the producers got the moisture. Some of the earlier wheat that was planted up there looked better. Some of the later wheat that was planted maybe didn't emerge until mid-December, in some instances the first week of February. And so I think, we end up cutting yield potential when wheat emerges in December by half is what most people will estimate. I think the verdict's still going to be out on that later emerging wheat in February. The one good thing about it this year is though with the colder temperatures and the cooler weather, maybe it's going to surprise us in some places. So that could be good. And I think that's maybe been the thing that saved us here in the south central part of the state too as well, is that we have emerged later, and the crop just isn't as far along as it normally is this time of year. In my years of wheat farming and growing up on a wheat farm and living in Oklahoma, never do I remember going to variety trials in the state and us wearing, our overalls and our stocking caps. So it's definitely a much different situation this year, this growing season. Also, you go to the variety trials here in the south central part of the state and nothing seems to be headed out right now. So that's going to be one of the things that's going to potentially help us for this freeze situation tonight as we're in the final stages of the pre-boot stage. Well, we have to realize that, farmers basically planted this crop on no moisture at all. And so that did allow for us to have erratic stands, poor stands in a lot of locations, specifically with northwest Oklahoma. We didn't get rain to cause the crop or any moisture to cause it to emerge until mid-December, or in some instances the last week of February up in far northwest Oklahoma. And I think if you look around still, some of the wheat that looks good in those regions that maybe be earlier planted. I was doing some tiller counts with a producer up in northwest Oklahoma last week, and I think that it would look like that maybe they could potentially have an average crop, but we also need to realize that the yields in that region of the state always generally are much higher than what the yields are in southwest and central Oklahoma. And when you look at the percentages and what those crops are still going to make, it's still going to be significantly less than what they're normally used to in those regions.
What's the attitude of the wheat producer in Oklahoma?
Well, I think all in all, if you go out and look at the crop right here in central Oklahoma today, things look really well. We don't have a lot of disease issues out there. I think in instances where maybe producers were wanting to use a foliar fungicide or a foliar fertilizer now, they've just been waiting to hold off and wait to see what these freezers are doing. And it seems like the last couple of weeks when I've been asked, I've said, well, we need to wait 7 to 10 days to see what that damage is going to be. And that's been my answer now, pretty much all for what's going to be the month of April. And so I think when you look at that, I think they're optimistic, but I think tonight, no doubt, has producers very concerned. And then if we get into another late freeze situation next week, I think that it's just probably not going to be anything that's going to be beneficial for us.
Okay. Last year, harvest started almost a month early. Where do you think harvest will be this year?
Well, I think that we're just in a season that's completely different than last year. Last year was a first for me in that we had started harvest in southwest Oklahoma in in, you know, maybe the second week of May, which was completely much earlier than what we normally predict, maybe the last week of May or the first week of June. This year, I think that based on what we're seeing right now, that harvest is going to be much later. I've been saying if we'd even get started in southwest Oklahoma, you know, the first week of June, that's probably where we would be at. But I think if you look at the damage that we've seen in the crop so far with freeze damage down there, and then what type of weather situation we're in tonight, I think that, you know, producers are hoping that they can at least have something to harvest altogether.